She hadn't stepped into her own garden in over a decade, until a boy with a notebook walked in, asking what used to grow there. The morning mist clung to the cobblestone streets of Harbour View, a quiet coastal town where the fog seemed to carry the weight of forgotten stories. In her immaculate, silent home, Eleanor, a woman who had meticulously organized every minute of the last 15 years, was unaware of the small change unfolding just beyond her window. Her life was a carefully constructed fortress against memory, each chore a brick in the wall she'd built around her heart. But this morning, a small, insistent sound, the rustle of dry leaves and the snap of a twig, came not from the wind, but from the forgotten wilderness that was once her son's favorite place. Eleanor's sanctuary was a cage of her own making. She moved through the house with the practiced grace of a ghost, her every action a precise, ritualistic dance. The clink of her teacup, the soft thud of the newspaper hitting. The table, these were the only sounds in a home built for a family. Her eyes, however, rarely looked out the window. They were fixed on the polished wood, the dusted shelves, the stark, empty spaces that spoke of a life pruned of all its chaotic beauty. She was a curator of stillness, a guardian of a museum that held only one exhibit, her own grief. Her routine was a silent prayer to a God she no longer believed in, a desperate attempt to outrun a shadow she knew would always be with her. One morning, while watering the single, stubborn fern in her living room, her eyes drifted to the window. She saw him, a small boy with a shock of unruly hair, sitting on a patch of dirt where roses used to bloom. He had a battered notebook in his lap, a pencil poised over a clean page. He was staring intently at a weed, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was a violation of her silence, a trespass on her carefully maintained oblivion. She felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang, not of anger, but of a deeply buried instinct to protect something she had long abandoned. The sight of him, so full of life and purpose in a place she had let die, was a sudden jarring chord in her silent symphony. He was a stranger to her, a tiny blot of color in her monochromatic world. She watched as he carefully sketched the contours of a thistle, his young fingers stained with dirt. He was seeing something in the mess that she had deliberately chosen to ignore. Her world, for a brief, terrifying moment, felt too small to contain him. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to retreat to the comforting emptiness of her routine. But she couldn't. The words caught in her throat, a lump of old sorrow and new fear. This was not just a boy in her yard. This was a crack in the wall she had spent 15 years building, and she didn't know if she had the strength to repair it. If you've ever lost something that felt like part of your soul, stay with this story. What he finds next might break you in the best way. This isn't just another sad story. It's about what happens when someone finally chooses to feel again, to see the world not as it was, but as it could be, with the help of an unexpected connection. Don't scroll yet. This is a story about the quiet courage it takes to open a door you thought you had locked forever. For 15 years, Eleanor had lived in a world without color. The garden was just the most visible part of it. The real absence was in her heart, where the vibrant memory of her son, Daniel, had faded into a soft, aching grayscale. He was a boy who saw life in every leaf and stone, a curious mind that would spend hours in the garden, a worn-out copy of a book on botany by his side. It was his domain, a place of shared jokes and silent understanding between a mother and her only child. His loss, an abrupt and cruel finality, wasn't just the death of a person. It was the death of a future full of unsprouted seeds and untold stories. It was the moment she stopped living and started simply existing, a shadow in her own home. That's the thing about grief. It doesn't just take a life, it takes all the little things that made that life worth living. It steals the sound of laughter, the smell of fresh soil on your hands, the shared silence that speaks more than words. It was a suffocating silence she had filled with routine and order, a silent monument to a life that had been perfect and then wasn't. The memory of his smiling face, caught in a photograph, was now a painful echo she couldn't bear to look at. The garden, once a place of joy, became a tomb of unfulfilled dreams, and she had walled it off, not with bricks, but with her own despair. The boy, Sam, kept coming back. He didn't try to talk to her, didn't even seem to notice her watching from the window. He was a creature of a different world, one where a neglected garden wasn't a place of sorrow, but a puzzle of nature to be solved. One afternoon, she watched him carefully extract a rusted metal box from a pile of weeds. It was an old birdhouse Daniel had built as a child, its paint long faded, its tiny entrance now home to a spider's web. Sam held it in his hands with a reverence that surprised her. He carefully placed it on a low stone wall, as if it were a precious artifact, not a piece of junk she had discarded long ago. It was a small act, but it felt like a tiny seed of hope being planted in a field she thought was dead. He began to do other things, little by little. He left a small, hand-drawn map of the garden on her doorstep, labeling a few weeds and a patch of what he called wildflowers. Another day, he left a single, perfectly formed dandelion, its yellow petals bright against the worn wood of her front door. It wasn't a direct gesture to her. It was an observation, a shared secret, between a boy and a forgotten piece of land. He wasn't trying to fix her or her garden. He was simply noticing what was there, a simple act of presence she had denied herself for so long. It was the first time she felt truly seen, even though he had no idea she was watching. What would you do if the only way forward was through everything you'd buried? Keep watching, because this moment, this tiny, insignificant choice to notice a boy and a weed, will change everything. This isn't just about a garden being revived. It's about a heart long dormant and walled off, finally being asked to breathe again, to feel the sun on its face and the soft earth beneath its feet. This is the moment where the past and a new, unexpected future collide. The day the album appeared was like any other, only it wasn't. It was the day Eleanor's fortress finally began to crumble. Sam, with the earnest innocence of a child, had been poking through a pile of her discarded belongings at the edge of the yard, things she'd tossed away in a furious moment of clearing out the past. He pulled out a worn, leather-bound photo album, its pages brittle with age. Eleanor saw him from her window, and her blood ran cold. She knew exactly what it was. It wasn't just an album. It was a time capsule of a life she'd tried to bury, a collection of moments with Daniel, laughing in that very garden. In her frantic need to erase the pain, she had almost erased the joy. Sam didn't open it. He simply sat with it in his lap, running his small fingers over the faded gold lettering on the cover. He treated it like a treasure, a forgotten secret he had stumbled upon. Eleanor, watching from behind her curtain, felt a wave of shame and regret wash over her. She had been so consumed by her own sorrow that she hadn't realized she was discarding the most precious memories she had. The album was a physical representation of her emotional state, beautiful and filled with life, but left to rot in the weeds. She had to do something, anything, to get it back, to protect it from the elements, to protect her past from being forgotten by a stranger. That evening, she found a small, hand-painted rock on her doorstep. On it, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "It's beautiful." She didn't have to wonder what he meant. He had seen the album. He had looked at the faces she had deliberately tried to forget, at the smiles she had deemed too painful to remember. A quiet panic set in. What had he seen? The pictures of her and Daniel, covered in dirt, laughing as they planted roses, the images of a happy family that was no more. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and more seen than she had in 15 years. A stranger, a child, had found the most sensitive part of her and, instead of hurting it, had called it beautiful. The next morning, she finally stepped into the garden. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. She felt a phantom pain, a ghost limb of a memory, as she walked towards the spot where Sam had found the album. He was there, not drawing, but kneeling by the birdhouse, his head bowed. He wasn't crying, but she could see the solemnity in his posture. He looked up when he heard her footfalls, and for the first time, their eyes met. His were not full of pity or questions, but of a quiet, profound understanding. It was in that moment she realized he wasn't just a boy sketching weeds. He was a silent observer of the world's hidden hurts. And in the silence of their shared moment, the first tiny shoot of a long-dormant connection finally broke through the soil. That morning, standing in the cold, silent garden with Sam, Eleanor faced a choice. She could retreat back into her fortress of routine, close the door on this small boy and the world he had reintroduced to her, and pretend this moment never happened. Or she could finally choose to feel, to step out of the silence and into the uncertain, messy chaos of a life still waiting to be lived. She looked at the birdhouse, the faded photos, and the boy who saw beauty in all of it. In his quiet, observant gaze, she saw not pity but an invitation to stop running from a ghost and start honoring a memory, to stop living as a victim of her past, and to start becoming the keeper of a new future. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Instead, she knelt beside him, her knees cracking on the cold ground. With a careful hand, she reached out and pulled a particularly stubborn weed, its roots tangled and deep from the soil. Sam watched, and then, without a word, he began to do the same. This wasn't a conversation, it was a silent pact. A shared understanding that some things had to be untangled and uprooted before anything new could grow. Slowly, over the next few weeks, they worked side by side. Eleanor taught him the names of the flowers that had once grown there, their stories and their needs. Sam, in turn, taught her how to see the tiny miracles in the garden's slow revival, the first sprout of a forgotten seed, the industrious life of a busy ant, the vibrant green of new life emerging from old decay. The day came when the garden was no longer a symbol of loss, but a tribute to hope. She had saved the most precious memory for last. Eleanor carefully planted a single, rare lily, the one Daniel had always wanted to cultivate, but never had the chance to. She chose a spot right by the front gate, where anyone passing by could see it. It was a silent, beautiful statement to the world. It wasn't about forgetting him. It was about finally letting his memory live out, in the open, in the sunlight, for all to see. It was a final cathartic act of love, a declaration that her son's spirit was not something to be buried, but something to be celebrated. He walked away with nothing, except for the one thing he thought he had lost forever, hope. And the world never saw Eleanor, the quiet, rigid woman who cleaned her house and lived in a shell of her former self. But today, you did. You saw the woman who, with the help of a small boy and a forgotten garden, chose to live again, because sometimes all it takes to save a life is listening when no one else does and seeing the beauty in things that others have left behind.